If you check your GoPro footage after a deep dive and it just looks like trash, you are not alone. So stay tuned to learn how to fix it. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Dive Vibe. My name is Zach. I am a technical rebreather instructor and a former Army medic / CLS instructor. And today, we are going to be talking about GoPros. GoPros are amazing little cameras. I feel like I don't have to tell anybody that. Most people have owned a GoPro at some point. I feel like I'm on like my fourth GoPro. This is the Hero 8 right here. I've been using this for a while, and it's a great little camera. I haven't felt the need to upgrade yet. One thing that has always kind of frustrated me, though, is that the camera works great in shallow water, especially with a red filter. Its colors and magic really looks good for how inexpensive the camera is. But as soon as you take it deeper, especially with automatic settings, the footage really starts to fall apart. You get grainy, you get stuff that's underexposed in the same shot with stuff that's overexposed, and it just doesn't look that great. And the footage just really isn't acceptable. Lately, though, I've really been trying to solve this problem because I dive primarily with a scooter. That thing right there. And it's pretty cumbersome, and with my bailout tanks, just adding a camera to that, because I have a big old camera, it's just really difficult, especially diving from shore. So I wanted something really easy that could just stay on the scooter, and that's obvious. I already have the GoPro. GoPro's the best form factor for that by far. So small, easy, barely adds anything. But I'm usually doing deeper dives, and typically the footage doesn't look that great, especially on stuff that my lights can't reach out and touch, or if my lights aren't on. Sometimes I want a big wide-angle shot of the reef, and lights aren't going to touch that. It's not really going to help. So while lights really are the answer to fixing everything on the GoPro, sometimes they're just not feasible. So I started looking at a point-and-shoot camera with a lot of manual control, something like the Panasonic LX10 or one of the Sony RX100 series cameras. But those get really expensive. You're talking like $1,500 sometimes for the housing. So I decided to exhaust every option possible on this camera, and I started looking into the settings. And the real problem is that you can't adjust the settings once the camera goes into the housing. You have to use the touch screen for that. So it's not like I can have a lower ISO when I'm up shallow and a higher ISO when I'm deeper. And by the way, ISO is just the setting that controls how sensitive the camera's sensor is to light. So if you've got a higher ISO, it'll be more light sensitive. You'll be brighter when in darker conditions. But if you use a lower ISO, it'll be darker, but the quality will be better. When you start bumping up to higher ISOs, the footage really starts to get grainy, and it just doesn't look very good. So we want to control that manually and keep it low. I started doing stuff like allowing the camera to adjust automatically in a certain range, like 100 to 400 ISO, but it still wasn't working very well. And if I lock it to a single ISO, then I'm stuck with that for the whole dive. And I don't really want to adjust the shutter speed all that much, although we may have to get into that. Typically, you want to use the 180-degree rule, which means you want your shutter speed to double your frame rate on your camera. So if you're running 60 frames per second, you need a 120 shutter speed. If you're running 30 frames per second, you need a 160 shutter speed, right? And that creates more natural looking motion. It's not absolutely critical. You'll still get, decent looking video, but if you want it to look cinematic, which is kind of what I'm going for, then you really want to be using the 180-degree rule. But you do what you got to do. It's underwater video. It's always hard. But we can't adjust the ISO underwater, and that really stinks, and that's what had me looking at a new camera. Or at least you couldn't adjust the ISO underwater. Until now. Thanks to some experimental firmware released by GoPro Labs, you can use a QR code and flash it in front of the lens to adjust the settings on the camera underwater. Awesome! If you have a Hero 10 or something like that, or even a Hero 8 and above, I do recommend just going out and getting this, and it'll solve your problem. I went a little bit deeper because when I got this, I bought the highest end version, the 4K Pro edition, and unfortunately they don't warn you about this on the website. It only says it on here. I guess if I'd looked at the pictures a little bit better, I would have seen it, but this one doesn't work for the Hero 9 or the Hero 8, and I have a Hero 8. It works for the Hero 10 and up. If I'd gotten the 2.7K version, then that would work with my camera. This changes things, but it doesn't work right. There's something funky going on. So I said, to myself, because I was going diving in like 2 days and I really wanted to use this, what if I make my own QR codes? And it turns out that's not all that hard to do. I would still recommend, if you've got a Hero 10 or even a Hero 8, just go buy the correct version. Buy the 2.7K version for your Hero 8 or whatever. And then if you got a Hero 10, maybe get this one. This is just too easy. Solves the problem. It's like 20 bucks. It's durable. You can carry it with you. That's nice. They didn't pay me anything. I actually bought that with my own money. It didn't even work. But I'll still put a link in the description for them, because I think it's a great product and they've really made things easy for you. But if you're a control freak like me, you can make your own QR codes. And I came up with this. So I went out and bought a laminator. I've used laminators before for diving stuff. I usually use the one at the dive shop. Laminators are not expensive. I paid $30 for one. I guess I thought you had to be a teacher or something to own a laminator. But this is great. Laminator for your stuff that you want to take underwater. Fantastic. So I got a laminator, and I went to the GoPro Labs QR code maker. It's actually just a simple little thing on GitHub. It's pretty easy to use, and you can change all the settings. So I basically set this up to lock all the other settings, but adjust the ISO up or down just by changing the QR code. I did make a couple other settings. This one's macro, 60 frames per second. It's not quite macro, but it's the closest thing I can do to it without adding a macro lens. But anyway, I took them out for a dive, and honestly, the results surprised me big time. This is definitely going to take some more adjustment because it wasn't perfect, but now I know which direction to head. But I'm going to take a closer look at that footage, because I think you're really going to be impressed. Even if it's not perfect yet, we're on the right track. Okay, first off, let's identify the problem here. GoPro automatic settings do not do well deep underwater, where the amount of light exposed to the sensor can vary wildly. Other than white balance, I don't really want the camera adjusting anything on its own. I could easily lock all the settings, but then my camera's only set up for a certain depth range, and depending on the amount of light you're getting that day, based on cloud cover and water clarity, you really have no idea, so you can only guess what you're setting it for. This footage was from a beautiful site out here called Touch of Gray. You can see that it looks washed out and grainy. When I originally attempted to grade it, the footage began to look even worse, so much so that I actually purchased an expensive denoiser plugin for Adobe Premiere, which performed admirably, but that kind of processing is so cumbersome, it takes so long to render, that I do my utmost to avoid it. And honestly, this footage was too far gone anyway, so the results weren't amazing. Keep in mind, we're not really focused on color or white balance. Filters aren't as effective on very deep dives, so lights are really the only cure for bad color on a GoPro, and we're trying to improve video in deep water without lights. So I leave the white balance on auto, because in the past, setting the white balance to any certain value, like 5500K or something like that, yielded disastrous results. I may look into controlling the white balance value with QR codes in the future, but for now, I'm just going to focus on exposure, because I feel like that is more important when you're this deep and everything's blue anyway. Now let's take a look at the dive where I was using QR codes. This is the shallower portion of the dive, and this is where I started to get a little surprised, because at first I was running 4K at 100 ISO with a 160 shutter speed, and I was really surprised at just how bright everything was. It was too bright, actually, so I ended up bumping up the frames per second to 60 so that the shutter speed could run at 120, and this is what it yielded, which in my opinion is still a little bit bright, although it doesn't look horrible. With some grading, it could probably look a lot better, but I would like to limit the light a little bit more. Once we descended below 60 feet, things were looking pretty good. 100 ISO was just about perfect here and gave a more natural look than I normally get with a GoPro this deep, and the graded footage looks pretty nice. And as we go deeper and deeper, in my opinion, the footage just looks better and better. This is still a 100 ISO, and as you can see, the lights are sort of kicking in the closer we get to this big lava formation and these banded angelfish. It might be just a little bit overexposed, but these settings with the lights at this depth just looked great. It's honestly looking pretty dialed here. Now this was the deepest point on the dive, right around 200 feet. And this is still a 100 ISO. And while it definitely looks dark, I feel like other than the sun up in the top left corner causing a little noise, I feel like it still looks pretty good because it gives more of an accurate representation of what you really see when you're down there. This is what it looks like when we're down this deep at that dive site. It's kind of dark. I could boost it a little bit, grade it, and make it look a little brighter if I wanted to, but I'm not really trying to show you like a National Geographic perfect representation. I want to show what it looked like for the diver. So I don't know, I'm definitely going to have to mess around with some settings because it seems like I don't really need anything higher than a 100 ISO except for in really dark situations. You know, deeper than 200 feet, we're probably going to have to bump it up to 200. This is what it looked like after I bumped it up to 200 ISO, and to be honest, I think it's just a little bit too bright. I think for the current conditions, 100 ISO just looks a little bit better. To me, it just looks more like what I'm seeing when I'm down there, and that's what I really want out of a GoPro. I'm definitely going to need to experiment a lot more, try out some different settings, make some more QR codes, do some more dives, and get things figured out. But for the moment, I need to put a bow on this video. So, if you would like to look into this yourself, I'm going to put a link for the Blue Water Photo QR code card that they sell. Just make sure that you're getting the right card for your camera. And I'll also leave a link to the GoPro Labs firmware that lets you actually read the QR codes if you have a Hero 8 or above. And I will leave a link to the GitHub page where you can actually create your own QR codes. I'm also going to upload the QR codes that I used in the video today to my Patreon, so if you'd like to get access to those and access to the new ones after I update them, then check out my Patreon and support Dive Vibe. So I've definitely got more work to do, but the results were super promising in my opinion. So much so that I've halted my search for a new camera. I might end up just buying a 100-meter housing for this thing, or I may end up going with the Hero 10, something like that, and getting a 100-meter housing for that. I haven't decided yet. So far, this camera works great for me, but I don't know. Do I want to buy a housing or a 2-year-old camera, or do I want to get a new one and get a new housing? That's probably the better answer, because GoPros, compared to other cameras, are not that expensive. I also kind of want to put it up against a paralens because I've heard that those do a great job compensating for the depth. I used a paralens, an early paralens, and it was impressive, honestly, and it's nice that it's designed for divers, but I already had a GoPro, so I didn't really feel like investing in one. But I would like to do a side-by-side comparison. GoPro with QR codes, adjusting it, really getting the absolute best footage we can, and then the paralens, really getting the best footage we can from that, and see which one does better. I'm sure some of you guys already have paralenses, so let me know what you think in the comments, because I'd really be interested to know how that camera's working out for you, especially the Vaquita, because I haven't gotten a chance to get my hands on that one yet. Is that even how you pronounce that? Vaquita. Oh my god. I've been talking into a camera too long today. But anyway, if you've got any questions or you want to weigh in on this, let's chat in the comments, because this is a really interesting project to me. Thanks so much for diving with me today, and I'll see you in the water.
Beat by Apollo, stop at New Apollo's. Cop a Henny sour, and I'm puffing Jack sour. Yeah, I feel a black power. Yeah, this time it's really ours. It's time to get the bag. Yeah, it's time to get the bag.